Hey sis, how are you? We are here live with Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet Table to talk about our convos with the candidates. My name is Cecilia Belser-Patton, and I will let the rest of the ladies introduce themselves.
Hey sis, I do it too. Glad to be here tonight with my sisters.
Hey, I'm Shay Moore, Wakanda Forever.
Hey sis, this is Stephenie Smith.
Hey sis, Denisha Snell.
Hey sis, Victoria Hammond.
We're so glad to be with you all tonight. We're going to kind of go over we are going to go over our conversations that we had with the candidates for mayor here in Kansas City, and share our thoughts, share with one another, really pop off one another of our ideas, what we feel, how this is moving going forward, and we're going to ground all of this in Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet's 4 tenets, which are in economic prosperity, health and vitality, education, and the eradication of violence. So who would like to kick us off about thoughts about our convos with the candidates?
Well, first of all, shout out to Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet for doing that because it's definitely necessary. We need to know who candidates are. We don't know them personally, but you get to know more the more that they talk. And I know some of you all had a chance to interview them, and I know Shay and Brian did.
Yes.
So what were your initial thoughts when actually being in their presence to interview them as you began to ask them the questions that we all want to know?
Yeah, I thought it was, first of all, a great idea. I love that you all even echoed it because it was a time where you could really go a little deeper. There's been, we joked about it the other day, this 15-umpteen forums, 50-11 forums, and so this was really a time that we could ask questions that were really relevant to Black women, and so that was good. And so I was really excited. I was able to interview 3, and I'm always interested in when we ask questions about race, how people can confront that or not confront that directly. And you can almost tell, and we were joking about this, but it's something serious to it about even how the familiarity of saying African American and Black. And when people don't have that familiarity, it's almost as if it has not been a common practice, that there's not a natural talking about it. And so I was really surprised by how fluid the conversation seemed to be, and I'm delightfully surprised, I would say. So I really appreciated the feedback. It didn't feel like there was much apprehension, at least for the 3 that I was privileged to interview, and so I was really surprised by that.
Stephenie, share out with everyone who you interviewed.
So I was able to interview Phil Glenn, Scott Wagner, and Steve Miller.
Okay.
And so had some very thoughtful responses. One of the questions that we specifically asked was about, will Black women actually show up in your administration? So it's one thing to have an understanding of what the needs are, but when it comes to really decision making and having a seat at the table, when we talk about the importance of having a seat at the table, and so to hear their feedback on Black women being represented in the administration and having leadership in it, I thought that was really key. And they had some good responses.
Good. Yeah. Did they have anything, Stephenie, about people that are currently working in their campaign?
They did. So Steve Miller was able to talk about Stephenie. Hey, Steph. So was able to talk about Stephenie, and throughout, I've seen him in a couple of other forums, and he has actually mentioned other Black women. Phil Glenn, I don't recall him mentioning anyone specifically, but he talked about the influence and understanding. I felt like he came across with a really good understanding of it. And then Scott Wagner, shout out to Scott Wagner. Yes, we can talk about Councilman. I got joked on because I said Brother Scott. But yeah, so and then he talked about it too. So, but the one that was really probably more profound or pronounced with his understanding was probably Steve Miller. What about you? I know you interviewed.
I did. I interviewed Councilwoman Alicia Kennedy, and I also interviewed Councilman Quentin Lucas. And so it was interesting, to really ground it in our issues and things that we want for our community. I think both of them did that well. I think also there was some skirting around some things. Skirting around race for one of the candidates and not feeling like that should be centered. both very clear about the visions that they have for Kansas City, with them being native Kansas Cityans, and both having very, very compelling narratives, compelling stories about moving from really Kansas City's urban core. Councilwoman Kennedy is from 37th and Benton, among other places that she said. Councilman Lucas talked about having experienced homelessness as a young person. And so them really having that type of self-determination and self-actualization and wanting to help to navigate that in our city, I think was the most compelling things about them. They had very clear ideas about what they want to do. Both of them centered very securely in housing, in education, eliminating violence in our city, and health. So they were good.
And can I take just a second to give a shout out to all 3 of the ladies that did interviews. You already know. And Amanda, who's here too. It is sometimes difficult to be put on the spot like that and getting, I'm assuming it was handwritten questions.
Yes,
you
it
said
was.
something about mosquito.
It looked like a mosquito.
Yeah. So I just want to give a shout out to the 3 of you for taking that on. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Tanisha, because I know you really spent some time. You invested a lot of time in this, and so I'd be interested in your view as observing. So what did you see? What did you hear?
I think that it was very interesting to hear everybody's opinion, their platforms. I am very grounded in public health. And very a long time employee of the city. I'm no longer an employee of the city, but I was. And so it's interesting because I have a bit of an insight on how the city really functions and how things work within city departments. I think one thing that's interesting to me is we go to these mayoral forums and people ask mayor candidates questions, and I sit back and I think,
How functional is it?
how functional is that, right? The mayor doesn't even, and so I think really what I gather from even paying attention and listening to all these is that we really have still some work to do on educating people on how our government runs.
Exactly.
Our democratic process.
Yes.
Was the conversation.
Yeah. We got a chance to interview 9 of the 11 candidates, and many of the questions that people pose are questions that they've sat down and written responses about. And even if the question is not particularly about that, they can say, okay, this is a money question, so let's talk economy.
Sure.
I would be interested to hear from the women who did interviews. Was there anyone that you was actually shocked by their presence? Maybe physically, not the questions, the way that they answered it, but how they came across, because I found myself being, I was impressed with some people I thought that I wouldn't be, and then in some people I was like, because I actually got a chance to talk with them on the air and then off the air. So that's what I'd like to know.
I can speak to who wasn't there.
Okay.
Hey, Scott Taylor. Scott, we're concerned.
He didn't come on our show either.
Bewildered.
He didn't come on our show either.
We're astounded. Puzzled.
We are informed.
We are informed of how much
Speak loud.
your actions speak loudly about not caring about Black women. And just, we want you to know, we heard it. We got it. Thank you. Speak on that.
And I think that is important. And so the showing up is an important piece. And so one of the things, we had a lot of time to talk before we went on, and just a little bit of time to kind of unpack some things afterwards. And so what I was delighted by is the same presence that seemed to be on camera during go time. It seemed very evident and fluid throughout. And so that is something for me that is also important about the people. But Denise, I want to go back to something that you said about us, the people, understanding the process and understanding who does what. And so there is I think a big gap of understanding, because even though we had some amazing questions, some of the questions were not even really part of the work of the mayor. And so just as a community, how do we skill build and knowledge build around who does what, and then how we can get more people in some of these city seats that are actually the doers. And so I think that is, as we begin to think about what is next and what can come out of this, I think a big education piece for all of us.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Because in case we all don't know, and then we're going to wrap up and move to the 4 pillars of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. But in case we all don't know, sis, our city is not a heavily mayoral-led city. There's council seats that really have most of the power. There are things that the mayor can do, and certainly the mayor has influence. Certainly the mayor can make suggestions that oftentimes will move forward. But really, the power in our city runs along the city council members.
And our
And the city
managers, right? And so there are things, as a person who works in democracy, I think that is something we must ask ourselves to become more aware of, is democracy and how our democratic process works, both at the local level, in our city levels, in our regional levels, and then across the state. So, thank you for sharing.
Still vote.
Yeah,
It's still very important.
important.
Because the mayor, I mean, we don't want to take all the power, but the mayor does have its own seat and its own power, but it works with.
Yes.
And so being able to really be a convener, and that was another thing, as asking the questions and getting an understanding of how the people have been able to navigate the convener space and how they've been able to navigate being able to work well with others. I think was a really important piece. But what about all the other things that are important to us?
So there are 4 pillars that really hold up Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, you all. First, it's us as Black women. We want to center that, and we're going to keep saying that because we know how important it is to say. But the 4 pillars of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet that we are really focused on using our influence and our power in every space that we're in is economic prosperity, health and vitality, education, and the eradication of violence. And so we really want to speak on that and allow all of us here at the table to talk about how these different issues, these 4 different issues, affect our lives, affect our health, our mental well-being, affect how we're able to care for ourselves and love ourselves, and therefore advocate for ourselves. So, Victoria, we have not heard from you, so we would like to get your voice into the room.
I love it. Love it.
So please share some thoughts that you have about the importance of these issues for Black women.
Okay, so when it comes to these issues, specifically when it comes to Black women and the people that I talk to, there's a sense of trust that needs to be built as far as economic prosperity goes. I see a lot of us convening and really trying to lift each other up, but there's a whole sentiment of women and moms just drowning in the work of just being who we are and showing up in our purpose. And so also with the economic prosperity, I would just love to see the professional piece being uplifted by just the whole mental health piece and servicing of, self-service and things like that. When it comes to health, I really want our voice to be seen and heard and really take control of that. And one of the things that I'm going to do as part of this issue is really start to set the tone and the standard of that language. What that language looks like. How do you present that language with still having and preserving your integrity and modeling what that looks like. And so even with the candidates, I would like to see the pressure being put on them to really focus on those issues.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Victoria. What about you?
Well, I look at all of these topics and these pillars, and they're all so connected.
Yes.
They are all so connected. One does not work without the other. And so I think through things like the eradication of violence and how that ties in with an educated population. And we know that I talk a lot about the social determinants of health and how those social determinants contribute to the health of a community as a whole. And so all of these tie into that social determinants of health. So there's one thing really that stood out to me when you all talked to the candidates about economic mobility for Black women, there was not very many that could really speak on that. I mean, specifically
right.
with any type of depth and anything that hit me like, yes, they get it. And so I would really like to see, number one, as Black women, we have to understand what does economic mobility look like for us, and then how do we, knowing how our government works, put pressure on others to say, these are the things that we need in order for our children to be educated, in order for us to begin eradicating violence, and for all of these things to work together, for us to be healthy as a community. So there's one thing that somebody spoke about, but getting people in key places in the city. We have boards and commissions that have appointed positions, and we also have boards and commissions that you can get on nonprofit boards, but the city has boards and commissions. So whether that's Parks and Recreation or the Health Commission, yes, economic development. So we want to be able to educate ourselves and then put ourselves in these key places, because nobody's going to do it for us. It hasn't been done yet.
That's right. Very good.
And I think too, understanding that power, what does it mean for us to speak for ourselves? We've heard a lot of people across the board having conversations about Black women who are not Black, right? About Black women through things like zip codes and health disparities and
About our bodies.
about our
children.
about our children, about our lives, and they're not Black. And so I think it's very important for us to ground ourselves in that. And even when there's a quote that says, speak, even if your voice shakes, right?
That's right.
And so I want to encourage us, sissies, to speak even when our voices shake. To realize that we have space and that we have power and we deserve that, and we're worth speaking up for ourselves in those types of ways. So,
and then I want to say too, we own our data.
That's right.
Nobody else owns our data. So we have access to the same thing everybody else has access to. What they haven't given us is a voice or a space to elevate our voice. And so we own our data, period, point blank.
absolutely.
And that's the importance of when we talk about a seat at the table. And so for some of us, because we wait for the seat to be vacated before we think that there is room, when many of us have the spirit of a carpenter, we can build our own seat, bring it, right, we can go cut the wood, you know, and sand it down and put it together and bring it to the table. And I think, you know, that's what I hear you saying, Denisha, about the power of us being able to navigate. And sometimes, and in most times, we can't wait on permission. And so really finding, and we were talking about this another time, all the other times when we leverage this strength in sometimes very toxic ways, this is a very efficient and beneficial way for us to leverage strength and really navigate and pursue, you know, put ourselves in spaces, because in most cases, boards and seats like that, they are given through people that you know. And so how do we get in those spaces where you know the person that knows the person that says, yes, I need you to sit in this seat. And so I think that that is up to us. No longer, and I'm really proud of the movement and the work that I'm seeing, not only here in Kansas City, but across the country, where women are mobilized and we are activated.
Yes.
And it's no longer this tomorrow speech about it. It is what is happening today.
Right now.
But we must continue to activate. We must continue to support. We can't be afraid to fail. I love that. Speak even if your voice shakes. Because you don't have to come into this thing perfect. And far too often, that's what we've been waiting on. We've been double dutching. We've been waiting for us to have everything in line. We've been waiting for everything to line up. And when my baby is this old, and when I'm this, and our time is now. And so that is a thing. I think that's an energy that I want us to continue to be able to spread to one another.
And to trust this space, and to trust who we are,
That's
and
right.
to trust these sacred conversations. Someone said when I was going through a rough time last year, that was a sacred circle. And don't be ashamed of speaking in those sacred circles. And don't be ashamed of when we're at certain tables to recognize, that table may not be for me.
That's right.
Or I may need to get on top of that table and do some tap dancing myself for me. Or I may need to do, like Stephenie says, break this table down and build my own. And so to really be centered in knowing ourselves, our spirit, loving ourselves so that we can speak from that truth. You were going to say something, Shay.
And I think that that's, as I look back as myself as I've gotten older, you know, I'm slightly 19, but
That's a good way to put it.
the conversations that my friends and I have now are all edifying conversations.
Yes.
I've got a good friend of mine, Shawana, and she is on her money game.
I love it.
And so finally she's like, listen, I'm sick of hearing you talking about this bag or this shoe or whatever this is. You need to have this amount of money put to the side. We just had another conversation a week ago about my Roth IRA and how much I need to be putting in this year. And so I think it's important for us to not only surround ourselves with women who are strong in areas that we may be weak in, because I wasn't raised having a conversation about money. They whispered about stuff got cut off sometimes they put something on something. And so to really be with someone who's strong in one area where I'm weak, and then being bold to go and take another sister who's even weaker than I am and teaching her what I have. You know, and I think that that's the step that we've got to definitely do, because we've been culturizing and thinking that women are not supposed to be, well, not supposed to speak. You know, we're supposed to be seen, we're supposed to be beautiful and not have an opinion on anything. And I think that that's where we've got to really make sure that we're doing the work and encouraging others to do that, and then taking the women who may not be as educated as we are or have the level of engagement that we have, and bringing them along.
Also, I think like just the accountability piece. So I love the fact that all the candidates, when I was watching the interviews, all the candidates had this way of understanding Black women, but we need to really move the needle past understanding. Like, what is your plans past that? Okay, you understand, but how are you really going to implement this? How do you really care?
Activation.
How are you showing up?
Yeah.
So those were the interesting things I would see, and then also visiting a couple of forums in different locations, just seeing if they're going to show up the same and what the focus is really on.
That's it.
I recognize a lot of people did not.
And that's important because you have somebody who theoretically knows what to say,
They
knows what Black women want to hear, and knows what should happen. But will you be on the ground for Black women? When I was in graduate school, a non-Black professor said, majority of women who are getting higher educations are Black women.
Yes.
That should mean more opportunities for promotion, for financial prosperity, for positions and access. But that doesn't always happen. And I think that we have to collectively take our space.
Yeah,
And at the same time, stop this voice. I think some of us have thought, well, you spoke a not yet, not the perfect time. Some of us think, well, I don't have enough smarts, I don't know enough. No, you can Google anything, the library still exists.
That's what everybody else
And
is
it's
doing.
about, thank you.
Hello?
It's not that
Do you
people,
know how many unqualified people are in
Yes.
our office right now?
we have Facebook professors
Yes.
that look at their English speaking, and they're basically professors. So it's not that you don't know enough, you're not good enough, and you're not there enough. No, that's not it at all. It's about taking the first steps to prepare so that when that opportunity you see it, you can step into the place. So we gotta take a chance on ourselves.
We do. Stephenie, we were in a space, I don't even remember what it was or where it was.
We were there together.
Yes.
That's all that matters.
I'm grateful for that. Last week, and you talked about that there are groups of people that don't allow their lack of having the requirements.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly what you
absolutely.
said.
So we were talking about when to apply for a position.
Absolutely.
And statistics, research tells us that men will qualify, will apply for positions that they will only have, if it is 50 qualifications, they will move forward even with just 3.
That's the truth.
While women, we are waiting to have 49 or 50 of the 50, and we'll keep telling ourselves, no, I don't have this, that, I don't have that, I don't have that. It's like, stop.
Do you think that's a conversation about worthiness?
I think,
Or do you think that's...
I think it's complex. I think it's about raising young girls and women to wait for permission for things. So we're waiting to be told, we're waiting to be granted access. I do think it is about this internal struggle with what makes me worthy.
Yes.
And I think it is also about this fear of failure and what happens when we fail. And I mentioned this, but I think it's important. What toxic strength does is it teaches us to pretend in such a way of having it that all of our energy is zapped, and then when it is really time to show up in spaces that we don't have it all in, we're so weakened by all the other experiences that we've had. And so I think that it is just that go energy that you talked about. I think we just got to start hitting that go button. And I'm not saying don't be reflective.
Yes.
Be reflective, be thoughtful, put yourself, that's right, in the best situation, position yourself to be able to win, but do it.
And so you have a good segue for us of, you just talked about toxic strength. And we do have that. Black women have resilience beyond measure. Resilience beyond measure. And what that toxic strength can do is provide toxic stress. It affects our health. And that's our second pillar with Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet is health and vitality. So what are the things that we can do and what we should do to really increase our health, increase our vitality, increase this, try to diminish the disparities that we see, and I know you can speak about that, Denisha, in the ways in which us being toxically strong, us being able to handle it all, us being the most educated group of people in the United States and the most underpaid group of people in the United States. It's just real. And so this economic prosperity then couples with our health and our vitality, right? We do the things that we should do, and then we don't reap the rewards for that. So what can we do to increase our health and vitality?
One thing that I think about, even in thinking in terms of the election and thinking in terms of city government, local government, even state government, we each have a lane. I cannot do what you do. I cannot do what you do.
We can't do what you do.
We all have our strengths. So I know that I understand foundationally public health. I understand how transportation and access to transportation ties into. So what does that mean when I'm thinking through that? I'm thinking through, I am committed in my life. I've committed my life to public health. I've committed my life to the health of my community. Now, how do I take that in the next step, right? So I look at, number one, I'm listening to what our possible elected officials are saying. So not just our mayors, but our candidates for mayor, but our candidates for our council district and school districts. I'm looking at the organizations that are doing the things that match my values, and then how do I align myself with them? And then work through them even on advocacy in that way. So I think that we all have to know, we talked about this strength, and some of this toxic strength this toxic stress goes with us trying to be everything to everybody. And I cannot. I'm gonna stay in my lane and do what I do best. And then I know I'm gonna push Stephenie because she does this really well, and so I'm gonna push her into that because that's just not my lane. But I support you though. So when looking at things like elections and advocacy and the topics at hand and the health of our community and the disparities, how do I align myself with people that represent the same values that I represent? And there's organizations that are doing advocacy work, there's organizations that are taking groups to speak at city council meetings or at committee meetings. How do I get involved with those groups? And I think that's something that we each can look at, is how do we get involved with things like that to really push our agenda forward.
And I would say what continues or gives us the permission to keep that stamina, because that takes a lot of energy, is by making sure that not only do you have good girlfriends, but you have a therapist. And so we talk about
that one more time.
Talk about the power of therapy. And Shay, you said it the other week, how you can pray and have a therapist at the same time. Because God sent that person. God empowered that person, created them. And so we don't want to let that vessel, that good talent go unused. And so being able to engage with the therapist, and that is the power of people having access to health insurance. Right, so then when we talk about the pathway back to advocacy and the connectivity to it, that's why it's important for us to be very knowledgeable of who our elected officials are and what their positions are, because those things really impact us. It is hard to go to therapy if you don't have insurance. It's possible, but it's more challenging. And so, but really, you know, how do we keep up our stamina and our ability? By being able to have good people around us that tell us the truth, that hold us accountable, therapy when needed, regular doctor visits.
Yes.
It's hard to move forward if you got a headache all the time because your blood pressure is high. So you got to understand that it's hard to be focused and be a good mother and to be a good daughter and wife and sister and everything when you're constantly in pain. When you have an autoimmune disease, when we have what we call weathering happening to our organs, you don't know why your lower back hurt, you don't know why your chest has always got a pain. Those things are very much distractions to us. And so the power and the balance and the relationship between us taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others is very much connected.
Yeah.
And so the vitality of our communities is really based upon our own. And so when I go into some of our communities that are struggling the most, it is no surprise that those are the highest chronic disease percentages that we have.
Because there's no access to healthy food.
Right.
Those things
So
don't
those
get
things definitely
Everything.
are something that we ask some of the candidates about the food
right.
deserts that exist in
And
the
food
urban core.
apartheid.
Yes.
Because I think that I think it's purposeful. I don't think that it is by chance that we don't have a grocery
We
store.
don't have a grocery store here.
We had
We don't
someone
have
on the
to-
show this morning who started an urban garden.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I was so intrigued by their story. Only 32 years old,
Nice.
lives in KCK in the food desert, and he and his friends just decided
do
to
it.
build a
They
garden. And people can come and get fresh produce.
That's amazing.
And when you think about, you know, the way that our food is handled, how far a lot of the food that we ingest comes from California or comes from wherever, and it sits in a container for so long, it's not healthy.
No.
And I think that that's part of the issue, even, you know, deeper is what we're taking in.
That's right, absolutely. And if you only have a place where you can get a dollar burger around the corner, all this ties together. Because if I don't have economic prosperity, I'm not going to go to Whole Foods or Price Shop.
Exactly.
You can't afford it. Then my health and vitality is impacted because I'm eating dollar burgers every day. That affects me. And if I'm dealing with something like a depression and I don't know it, I don't have insurance to go talk to a therapist, I don't have good girlfriends or other black people who believe mistakenly that you can't be saved to be depressed.
Right.
And that's
Mistakenly.
that's
We
what
want to
it's
say
like.
mistakenly.
Flag on the flag. Flag on the flag. Yes. And then you have an education system that's not helping you prosper. All this, nothing is compartmentalized.
No, not at all.
And that's why we gotta have these important conversations, particularly among sisters.
That's right.
So one of the things, I'm sorry, one of the things that I absolutely love, I feel like the community is now, especially black women, we're now being open to the self-care piece. Like,
Yes.
I am.
But then there's still
Not selfish.
a connection with the gap because in that itself, you have to find a therapist that is really cultivated and open and know how to work with black women.
Culturally competent.
Culturally
Yes.
competent, culturally responsive. I don't even need you to be competent.
Okay,
I need you to
responsive. That's
respond
good. That's
to
good.
what I'm giving.
There
And
are
relevant.
differences.
And
And
relevant.
culturally
There
relevant.
are differences.
We need culturally relevant and culturally responsive practitioners,
Yes.
therapists, doctors, bankers, everything that's on here,
Everything.
educators. We need this. It's important.
Right?
Because that's what maintains all of this. But I'm sorry, you were saying. See, you look what you jumped off. You did that.
Look at you. Did you see it?
So,
We got excited.
but even with the therapist and having,
That was hilarious. Go ahead.
That's some food therapy coming.
All locally sourced.
but that, even what you just said, that all goes back to how Kansas City really cultivate our talent, how we keep young professionals here. So how are we going to keep those black women here once we get them at the level where they're supposed to? So as youth development go, are we really connecting those service provider positions? Are we really connecting those so we can have culturally relevant just activities and experiences that are really helpful for our growth? And so that's kind of where I'm at.
That's good. Very good.
So with that, we've kind of touched everything, but this is a really hot topic, and I think we need to give it some time. Because underlying all of this that we've talked about is education. And education is really bubbling in our city right now. It always has, actually. We have a peculiar relationship with education in Kansas City. A peculiar relationship that we have As one of the candidates said last night, I thought it was 15. We have 18 different school districts within the Kansas City parameter. And so what does that do? How is that? And you know, when we as Black women are having not only to be concerned about our own education, and please know that when I say that, I'm not speaking of a formal education only, you all.
That's
I'm
right.
speaking of how we continue to learn and grow and develop and move, coupled with a formal education of what that looks like, and then have to be concerned about that for our children. Then have to be concerned about how we're going to provide those types of things. I would really like for us to double down and think about that as these different things are moving forward around education. None of the mayoral candidates really wanted to, although Councilman Lucas did talk about how he wanted to leave education to the professional educators, that he wanted to support that and move forward and do the things that he could do, but also to get experts in education to do that and not just only community members or the mayor's office. So what are some of the things that you all think about education?
Ooh, education. Every child should be able to compete no matter where they go. I remember mentoring a girl when she was at one school. She's the top 10%. She moved to a suburban school and she's like, Miss Julie, I can't do this. She said, I am not prepared. I have dropped. And that just really spoke to me because if I live in a certain zip code, why can't I compete? Why can't I compete? And I always use the example of Lincoln, not University, Lincoln High School. Because those kids are able to compete. So why is it that I can have a school and students rate? It's the expectation.
That's right.
Exactly.
You are not allowed to fail there.
Exactly.
Failure, and we have schools, even in the suburbs, I'll say, oh, well, it's not an F. Okay, it's a D, and D ain't for dandy. That's right. So we have to take education seriously, and what you spoke about, cultural competency, that matters in our schools. Because some people don't want to realize they get offensive when we talk about race and implicit bias. Just because I'm talking about race, I'm not calling you racist. But if you're racially ignorant, that's just as dangerous. Because you're not seeing how your ideas and how you communicate with our Black children impacts their ability to learn.
That's right.
So we really have to dig in deep.
That's right. And what if you are? And see, I think when I say what if you are making race-based decisions? What if you are leveraging your power? And I think a lot of times when we talk about race, we think about instant hate mongering, we think about crosses burning, we think about white robes, and we say, oh no, I'm not a racist. No, what you mean is that you're not a hate monger. But let's examine the behavior to understand how race-based decisions have affected us. And I think that, when we talk about education and you have parents that are waking up every day trying to do their best, and so if you have parents, or you even, and I always remind people, Black and poor are not synonymous. Right? Those things do not mean the same thing. So you can have Black people who have always grown up in the suburbs, who feel like that is very much their place, just like anywhere else is. And guess what? Their children need to be culturally responsive, have culturally responsive education as well. And so the trouble that I have with our education system, the struggle is whether you are in what we call the urban core, in the city of it, and you struggle with education, or your children as a Black mom is in the suburbs and they are one of 5 in their classroom, we are still talking about subpar learning environments. And what does that do? And so how can we as a city, whether you're on the Missouri or the Kansas side, shout out to Wyandotte County, from the dot, but no matter what side, this is a bi-state initiative, a bi-state approach that we should have about really ensuring that we have high quality, culturally responsive experiences that promote learning. And you're right about kids will hit whatever bar you set for them, even the low one. And so how can we hold our institutions responsible for giving us what we need? And I think that is something that we can not only look to our elected officials for, but we got to come in for. I want to see who's running for Lee's Summit. I'm so excited about the next. You know what I'm saying? Right, this election and then the next one, because after everything that has gone on, it should be a full day. Whether it's Lee Summit, North Kansas City, KCPS, Center, Hickman Mills. Cerner is a whole other but we have to activate. That's the point. We need to activate.
Cerner, $1.5 billion that they made off
Listen.
of Kansas City.
Listen.
They were able to buy a whole new company.
Listen, and then how much that money went to the schools? And then about to close school. Okay, yeah.
Two got closed yesterday.
Yeah.
Because of tips. that were handed out like candy.
Yes.
Just ask us about those. We know those too, right?
We
So-
figured out whole transportation systems for them, for all big corporations, and we hold them zero account.
Man.
No accountability there. And so that's another level of education, right?
Yes, it
Another
is.
level of
It is.
education of how we help Black women understand these high topic, or these people that want to put out all this legalese. Many people don't know what a tip is, why that's so important, and they don't want us to know. Many people don't know the different ways in which we are not educated around the things that very much affect our lives, right? And so how do we move forward in that? Like we always, when we go to education, we center this in our children, and we should, our youth, and how that affects us too. These different things of this development, which is wonderful for our city and our surrounding area, and that to entice developers here, that was so much more important than people, that we said you do not have to commit to your community. You do not have to help to pour into your
You can just
community.
take out.
You can just take
What you want.
And so we have to be more aware of that and more educated around these things, so then we can hold our elected officials accountable for their impact in our community.
And I think when we talk about education, I have a lot of theories on that, starting back with segregation and desegregation, but I won't get into that. We desegregated our schools.
I think it's the worst thing that ever
Well,
happened.
I agree. And so having two parents that grew up in the South, one who was very close with Little Rock 9, and neighbors with Daisy Bates, and they desegregated. Yes, my dad, yes. So they desegregated the schools with our children, but they did not desegregate the schools with teachers.
That's right.
And so they let go of these high-performing Black teachers, so they wouldn't hire them into these schools.
That were PhD.
Yes, right?
Sumner High School.
Yes.
Slamming.
Yes. And so they desegregated, they sent our children, or our forefathers and grandfathers and grandmothers out into these schools with nothing there to protect them.
They were emotionally unsafe.
They were emotionally
psychologically
unsafe.
unsafe.
Yes.
And how are we doing that right to this day?
And it continues.
We're
Still modeling that, and it perpetuates.
That's right.
And so again, I go back to the advocacy. I firmly believe that all of us have a space and a place. Some of us have to be in the streets, and some of us have to be in the boardroom. But we have to educate each other, because nobody else is going to take, or nor do they care to educate us, nor our kids. I'm a mother. Nobody cares more about my kids than I do. And they most certainly don't care about, I'm struggling getting my daughter an internship, or trying to help her find, things look different. And so our pathways, and so that really goes along with us building and teaching each other. So most of us are educated. How do I teach that next mother?
Yes.
Okay, I get it. You may not have a lot of education, but come on. We're going to navigate this thing together. And then those of us who do have the education, building those advocacy pieces and building that accountability in there, because nobody's going to do it. Nobody else is
And no
gonna
other community is positioned to do it the way we can.
Right.
The connectivity amongst us as Black people is strong, it's powerful. So it is very likely that on an everyday basis, not only am I having interaction with the street warrior, the advocate that's out there bumping the paveways, understanding what's going on, and still also have someone that is connected to what's happening in the boardroom. That happens every Sunday at Grandma's table, right? So we have access to all of that. It's about us continuing, and I'm going to say continue, because I will not be one that says, we don't do this in our community, we don't do that. There's a lot of great things. There's a lot of great things.
Yeah,
And we're going to
yeah.
continue to connect the dots with intentionality and having these type of conversations, because it is through transparency that's where the deliverance comes.
Absolutely.
So us talking to one another and us seeing what's on the other person's mind is so important in creating a pathway.
Absolutely. That's a part of education too. Interrupting these messages that we have been told about ourselves that are untrue. So thank you, Stephenie, for reminding us that there are still great things happening in our community. There are still great people being developed in our community. There are still traditions that hold us that like no other community. And so we need to speak on that.
And there are great things happening in our public schools.
Absolutely.
Our urban public schools.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So this moves us to our last pillar for Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, which is a tender one, violence. Violence in our communities, in our homes, in our educational systems, violence in our job places for economic prosperity, violence in our hospitals and doctors' offices, you know. So I'm really glad that we're segueing in the ways that we are, because we're talking about this intersectionality of how us as Black women, we are hit with all of these things at the same time. At the same time we're Black, we're women. At the same time we're women and Black, we're dealing with these different things in a rate that other women are not. And so how do we deal with this violence that is happening, and how do we work towards eradicating it?
There is so much undiagnosed rage and pain and disappointment that runs through the Black experience in this country. It's never been fully talked about. And even in today's terms, it's like, well, that doesn't exist anymore.
That was 400 years.
It was 400 years ago, but guess what? My grandmother taught that to my mother, and my mother taught me how to maybe play it down a little bit, because you don't want to have someone hurt you for being a Black woman, and when we stand up for ourselves, you know, now you may be thrown to the ground by a police officer. So we teach our kids, even now, if you get pulled over. I have a friend of mine who's taught her son, you know, put your hands this way. And so he can't even be himself. And that has to wear on someone. Just me personally, I have a master's degree. I had some undiagnosed rage that I was dealing with, and I found myself, and I talked about it at the brunch, about being at this Chinese restaurant, and I was trying to get into a space, and a lady was trying to get into a space too. And I'm a stuffer, so I stuff my feelings, and I smile and do what I need to do. So we're pulling in at the same time. I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it that day. I challenged her, I asked her to get out the car, let's handle this.
Let's do this.
And I was dressed up. I had on a suit and heels and everything, and I was going to go get something to eat. And the man who sold DVDs at the Chinese restaurant said, "Miss Lady, is that you?" I was instantly ashamed. And that's when I went and got help. And every Thursday I went and saw a therapist, because I said something is wrong with this. But not every one of us has that awakening to say, wait, something's wrong with this. We just think that I'm about it, I'm real. If somebody stepped to me, it's going down. And so that's kind of been the badge of honor that sometimes we cling to as a people, because the other positive things of ourselves are not pushed to the front.
Let's not call it rage though, let's call it trauma.
It is trauma. It's trauma which turns into anger.
Yeah, we've been
And then when you don't know what to do with it, I call it like a jack-in-the-box syndrome. Like after I'm pushing stuff up, it can come out, and then it affects you in other areas where you may be in a space at work, and a response may be the wrong response, because you're really thinking about a time when someone else tried to objectify you, or someone else tried to, and it's a trigger. Exactly.
That reminds me of Dr. Joy DeGruy, and I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to see her, but she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, and nowhere else has any group of people experienced something like slavery for 400 years and not get any type of help or therapy. Okay, slavery's over, go on about your business. It was not like that. Number one, we didn't get our 40 acres in our rule. We didn't get, there's a lot of things that happened though. I'm joking, but we did get our 40 acres in our rule. But there's things that, slavery's over, but we had to deal with Jim Crow. We had to deal with Reconstruction. We had to deal with lynchings. We had to deal with separate but equal. We had to deal with all of these things. And never once did we get therapy.
Not understanding of money. Right?
Right.
We talk about that, we still don't know how to talk about money, is we weren't taught that. And so then we have generation after generation after generation that doesn't know the energy of money, right? And that is traumatic. And what happens, like you said, Shay, when we're going on about our business and we are triggered with something that happens, and it seems like it's that thing, and it's something that happened 10 years ago.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Or even how we, how we engage with our children.
Yes.
When you know how you always say your mom be like, come right here. Then mama, these 2 squares are yours, right here. This is where I need you to be. And understanding the connectivity to that. You think about Emmett Till. You think about how up north, during Jim Crow era, how families up north used to send their children down south, and many of them did not return because of racism, because of all those things. And so you get taught to keep your kids close. But what it could look like is suppression for that young person. And how many of our kids have been taught by osmosis, not that they were ever verbally told, but that the world is not yours.
That's right.
So what happens when we tell our kids that they can only be right here? What happens, and I know why we do it. It comes from a space of love. We want our children protected. We want them safe. But what they can learn from that is the world is not mine.
That's
That
right.
this is just mine. And learn
not
not to
worthy
take
of
risks.
everything.
I'm not worthy of everything. While they see their other counterparts running all over the place. And I'm not saying we need to mimic bad behaviors or what others are doing, but we do need to be thoughtful about what am I teaching? What am I modeling? And why?
And that's the important
Become
thing.
curious.
Yes, because when you become a parent, you discover your own unsettled issues.
Yes, you do.
Because parents will come up, I say, I'm still dealing with that. And a lot of times you compare from a place of fear because of where you've been. And of course, out of love, you don't want your child to go through that. And then you see in all the things that happen, to be like, so you're trying to make a path. At the end of the day, we can't parent or live or be women from a place of fear.
You're
Because
right.
if we do, we're always going to be in chains.
That's always. You're always going to be tethered to that.
We don't have to worry about what somebody else will do to us because we then tend to do it to ourselves.
Yes.
And that's working out of trauma in that way. That we will do these things, this learned behavior, this socialization, this limited way of being, this scarcity model, and we'll do this to ourselves. And so a lot of that happens in the violence that we experience in our communities.
I would like to see coping skills being taught. So back to what we're teaching our kids. One of the things that we're not teaching them, we always hide our kids from the hurt and just want to teach the learned lesson as opposed to walking your children through the hurt with you. This is how I deal with this. This is how I overcame this. This is something you might go through as opposed to you sitting in this circle in this square, not moving. And so everyone's operating out of hurt. And so operating out of hurt, I see the engaging pieces out of hurt. So whether that is your kids, your moms, relationships, and it's just how do we move the needle? So I feel like this gift and the curse of being a strong Black woman. The gift and the curse is that we're strong, and so really living up to that name, what does that mean? So we take on, and a lot more is dumped on us, and the actual visual and ideas.
It's time for you to go.
Go ahead. But it's just the idea of really how to navigate through different spaces and the thoughtfulness of how we're navigating with each other. And recognizing, taking a step back, like you said, Shay, it was like a lot of traumatic things that were happening to me day after day after day after day. And I had to take a step back and say, okay, I'm like, oh no, it's cool. I just, seizure, CPR, blood, it's okay. And I was like, wait, you buried your cousin.
Yes.
And so I haven't even begun to be able to process one thing before I'm unpacking and all these other things are coming out. So people that know me are like, oh, you're good. Okay, cool. What's next? I said, you know what? I'm not. Let me take a step back. And so being able to find that voice and to leverage those opportunities to really take a step back and heal from hurt. And that's what I want to see.
That's powerful.
Just the whole life.
Right. Sometimes you have to take a reset. We have a lot of it. Shay and I've talked about this before. Undiagnosed mental illness.
Yes.
Period. And whether that causes you to act out on your spouse, your kids, or self-harm to yourself. So that's why mental health is going to have to be a key component in every aspect.
That's right.
And for some of us who, there's some people who will never do therapy. And sometimes it's due to access or fear. You have to find somebody that you can talk to. Like Shay, my part-time therapist, I go and she can read me. She's like, oh, you seem heavy today. And I'm like, sage.
Let me get that out of here.
But you see your face and be like, oh, it's very important. And even a strong Black woman can deal with depression, anxiety, stress, and you have to identify that.
Yes.
Because sometimes we all actually become victimized, you know, by those things because we're not doing it.
Or we self-medicate, and
Yeah.
so we do it with alcohol, we do it with sex,
Yeah.
we do it with drugs.
Spending money we don't
do it with
have.
We spend
Organic snacks
money
that are
we don't
locally
have.
sourced.
We don't have.
The organic snacks.
Right.
I'm so glad that you spoke about that, Stephenie, because we tend to be really hard on ourselves because we internalize the way that other people have conceptualized us. So I hear people talking real rough and tough and ugly
Yeah.
about the mental illness of abuse, of substance abuse, and all of those types of things. And we can see it right now in our media, even in the ways that people are dealing with the opioid addiction, as opposed to
The war
crack
on
addiction,
drugs.
the war on
Now it's
drugs,
the opioid
you know?
crisis.
And
Right.
so,
Yes,
right,
that's
right.
Ours was a criminal.
And ours was criminalized. And so I think it's really important as we're talking about the ways in which we cope, that the same place in our brain that hits alcoholics and drug addicts also hits those of us who eat too much, those of us who shop too much, those of us who gamble, right? It is that same space of trying to fill up that thing. And so what will happen if we were more gentle with ourselves and looked at these things as illnesses? And I know we don't want to say, I don't got no mental illness. It took one of my college friends who was a psychology major, and I was like, why are you majoring in psychology? I was like, all that, like, you know, we don't go through that stuff. And she said, Cecilia, 99% of us have some type of mental illness. And it really freed me, and I'm glad it freed me young, from the stigma of therapy, from the stigma of really realizing that we can do something to improve our quality of life.
And we can do something, and that's the thing, we can do something about it.
We can.
And we can hold people accountable. You mentioned really quickly the opioid and versus crack. And I don't know how much people know about that, but when crack hit our community, it was
Placed in our
criminalized.
community.
Thank you. Placed in our community, it was criminalized. And the opioid crisis is a largely non-black crisis. Now it has some seepage now, but when we look at how people begin to advocate for this opioid, including some of our officials, public health officials, prosecutors, those are the people that we need to begin to hold accountable for things like that. And so that's another part and way that this ties into when we're looking at who do we elect and how do these things play against each other or connected with each other. We have to see how the system is stacked and be able to work in that and against that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Denisha. That's a good segue into why this election is so important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we don't think about that. We don't think about who people are that are prosecuting attorneys and what that does to our community specifically. What that does when all of these things, these systems that we've just talked about and these issues that we have, how our elected officials either advocate for us or they don't. And so let's talk about why this election is so important to our community. And I want to even reach outside of this because so many people, you know, we're no longer a monolith. All Black people don't live in the same space anymore, right? So even those of us who don't live in Kansas City proper, let us be clear that Kansas City proper has helped to shape and create the life we live even in the suburbs, right? So this should be important to us as well. And so why is this election so central to the health and wellness and our situatedness as Black women?
Because it's all connected. I mean, everything that we have talked about, because nothing, I mean, the chairs that we're sitting in, somebody put it together. Even if it was, you know, automatically put in, somebody had to put that together. So we're all connected. And so what one does has a ripple effect. And so there's not one thing that we talked about during our time thus far that is not impacted by somebody that we get a chance to vote in or out.
That's right, that's
And so us understanding our situatedness to that fact is so important for us to just allow it to fall on us. Because a lot of times these things can seem so ethereal, like so out there. But really what we do on April 2nd is very connected to what happened on April 3rd and the day after and the day after. And so I think each of us have to internalize that and hopefully be encouraged to take our seat and make sure that we show up for every election.
That's right.
Because it really does impact. Not showing up for certain elections determines the next election that you know about. It determines the mail that you get. I mean, it is just so interconnected, and so that's why it's important, because of all the things that we've already talked about.
I hear you saying too, Stephenie, that, you know, for those of us who are not actively engaged with our civic engagement, we tend to vote every 4 years. We need to vote every time, every election. Our national elections and our elections that happen every 4 years, yes, that affects our lives, but not how voting in our local elections do, not how voting for our state officials do. So please, please, please do so. Please advocate for yourself. Please love yourself enough to say, I matter and my vote counts. I don't want to get on my soapbox, but I can. My teacher self can come out, and I tell people, we are standing on the shoulders of those that came before, that not too long ago did not have the privileges that we have. And so we must honor that, y'all. We just must.
That's right.
Yeah.
And your credit score can go up. That's what my girl told me.
And your credit score can go up, according to Celia's girl. And that's so important.
Essentially.
Try and see. Vote in every election.
That's right.
So what are some of the tips that we can give? How do you all plan to vote? Is there a certain time of the day that you go?
For me, I wake up early. I like to get up and I be in the dark. I'm like, I'm with all the duck hunters and waiting to vote. I get excited about the idea of voting. And I'm excited to see what direction our city chooses to go in. And pretty soon we'll be back talking. We'll be talking our presidential race soon. So the people have to understand, local politics matters. Because at the end of the day, just like people didn't vote in midterms. Now, if you get a senator or somebody, and they do not advocate on your behalf, you didn't vote.
Exactly.
Bottom line, you have to vote in every election. Local elections matter. And then it ends up being these people represent you. And what happens? In our city, our state, it's all connected. You have to vote. Go to kceb.org if you want to see the sample ballot. I Google everybody. Like if I'm not familiar with somebody like the judges, I had to really look up. Literally, go Ballotpedia.
It's that important.
Yeah.
It's that important.
And we have that power, y'all. We don't have any excuses anymore to think about why we're not Googling to get this information when we Google everything else, right? So just do that. Like put in who's running in what district am I in? Some people don't know what district they're in. And that's okay to not know. But when that thought comes up, figure it out, you know, and then see who is for you, right? Any other, are there any early morning voters? I'm an
early morning voter, and it's also like a holiday in my house because I'm introducing my kids to democracy. And so
I heard you had children, Victoria.
But we talk about the candidates, we get in the car, we talk about the history, how it's connected, and then she gets her sticker at the end that she gets to, demonstrate that she voted. And so that's kind of how I use that. I'm early morning voter.
Me too. I'm there at 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Wow.
Standing in line.
Jogging suit.
That's me.
With
But
my
Amanda said yes. Shout out to Amanda.
with my voting face like.
Exactly. Don't have any shenanigans.
Yeah.
I have my information. This is what I need.
Don't play no games. Give me my
I mostly like
list.
to see my elders.
Yes.
So I like to do that early morning voting because they are there with their walkers, their canes,
I
with
love
their fire personalities, and I love to see
Can't
that.
wait.
Love to see
I'm gonna be
that.
something else at 80.
With some bread.
Okay.
Absolutely. We have our polling
I was
results.
gonna say, do we have our polling
Are
results?
those coming? Is that-
They should be, yes.
Yes.
We're gonna
So-
share those
The phone
at
cut
home.
off.
We're
So we-
sharing them.
The battery
Phone
is
cut
out,
off.
baby.
Oh, no.